The gavel banged down on Lot 214 at the Ashford County Salvage Auction, and nobody in the crowd wanted it. 17 wrecked, rusted, or half-stripped cars sat under a gray October sky, tagged with a single line on the auction sheet. Bulk sale, AS's, NO titles guaranteed. Jack Sullivan stood near the back with his hands jammed in his jacket pockets, doing math he already knew the answer to. He had $400 in his checking account and a daughter, Maya, waiting for him at his sister's house after school. He was a mechanic at Pete's garage, good with his hands, bad with money, and worse with luck since his wife passed 2 years ago. He wasn't there for Lot 214. He'd come to see if he could grab a decent transmission out of a wrecked sedan 2 lots over, something cheap enough to keep his own truck running through the winter. The auction crowd was thin that morning, mostly scrap dealers in work boots, and a handful of hobbyists nursing coffee against the cold. Nobody expected much from a random bulk lot at the back of the yard. But when the auctioneer rattled through the 17 cars and got no bids, something in Jack's gut told him to raise his hand. He didn't have a plan. He just had a feeling. The same feeling he got when he found a good engine hiding under a bad-paying job, that somewhere in that pile of rust, there might be something worth saving. 2,500, Jack said. A ripple of laughter went through the crowd, and it wasn't kind. Near the front, in a cream-colored coat that looked wrong next to the mud and rust of a salvage yard, stood Victoria Hale, head of acquisitions for Hale Motors, one of the largest restoration and resale chains in the state. She was there scouting a separate lot of repossessed luxury vehicles for the company, and Lot 214 had caught her eye only long enough to dismiss it. 17 dead cars for $2,500, she said, just loud enough for the people around her to hear. Somebody's about to learn an expensive lesson in scrap metal. A few people chuckled. Jack didn't look at her. He signed the paperwork, wrote a check that would leave his account nearly empty, and became the owner of 17 vehicles nobody else wanted. Victoria watched him walk toward the tow trucks he'd need to rent just to haul his prize home, and shook her head. Some people, she murmured to her assistant, buy junk and call it hope. Getting the cars home took Jack 3 separate weekends, 3 borrowed trailers, and every favor he had left to call in from friends at the garage. His co-worker Ray loaned him a flatbed on Saturdays. His neighbor, a retired trucker named Owen, hauled 2 loads for the cost of a tank of gas and a case of beer. Piece by piece, the 17 cars made their way from the Ashford County lot to Jack's own backyard. He lined them up behind his house in Millbrook, a modest lot backing onto a stretch of woods, 17 broken shapes under blue tarps, and for a while, even Jack wondered if he'd made a fool's bet. Maya thought it was the best thing that had ever happened to their yard. She named half the cars before he'd even popped a hood, walking between them after school with a marker and a notebook, giving each one a story of its own. But Jack Sullivan didn't quit things. He'd learned that the hard way, raising Maya alone, keeping the lights on, keeping her laughing even on the nights he wasn't sure how he'd manage the next bill. So every evening after his shift at Pete's garage, and every weekend Maya spent with her aunt, Jack pulled back a tarp and got to work. The first month was inventory and grief management. 6 of the cars were truly gone, frames 2 bent, engines 2 seized, not worth the steal. He sold them for scrap, and used the money to buy parts for the rest. 8 were solid used cars, a decade-old pickup, a couple of sedans, a minivan with a cracked windshield and nothing else wrong with it. Those, Jack figured, he could fix up and sell for a modest profit over time, the way he always dreamed of doing if he ever had his own shop. It was car number 15 that stopped him cold. It sat furthest back, half swallowed by blackberry vines, its paint gone matte gray under decades of grime. The body lines were strange, low, wide, aggressive in a way that didn't match any production car Jack recognized. No visible badging. A hand-stamped plate riveted near the firewall instead of a standard VIN sticker. Jack spent 2 weeks of evenings just cleaning it, piece by piece, before he let himself hope. Underneath the grime was hand-formed aluminum bodywork, a chassis number stamped instead of printed, and an engine bay built for something far more serious than a commuter car. He photographed everything and sent the images to an old classmate, now an appraiser specializing in prototype and pre-production vehicles. The appraiser called him back within a day, his voice tight with disbelief. The chassis number matched an engineering test vehicle from a now-defunct performance division of a major automaker, one of only 3 ever built, and the only one whose whereabouts had been unknown for over 20 years. It had likely been quietly auctioned off as scrap after the division folded, its records buried in a warehouse somewhere, its identity lost to a decades-old paperwork error. There was, of course, a problem. The car had no clean title, only, as is, no titles guaranteed, same as the rest of Lot 214. Jack knew that without proof of ownership, the car was worth nothing to a serious buyer, no matter how rare it was. So through the second month, alongside his usual repair work, Jack did something unglamorous but essential. He traced the chassis number through state salvage records, contacted the county clerk's office, and worked with the appraiser to document the vehicle's full history of abandonment and sale. With that paper trail, plus the original bill of sale from the county auction, he applied for and was granted a bonded salvage title, a standard legal path restorers use for vehicles with a broken ownership chain. It wasn't fast, and it wasn't free, but by the end of the second month, the car was his, on paper as well as in his backyard. By the third month, Jack had also finished restoring 3 of the 8 solid used cars, selling them quietly through word of mouth to cover parts, tools, and the small fortune he'd spent chasing down the prototype's history. He kept working nights at Pete's garage the whole time, refusing to let Maya notice how tired he was, refusing to let the dream slip just because it was hard. The story went statewide within a week, then national. Collectors and auction houses began calling. A major collector car auction reached out directly, offering to feature the prototype in their spring sale, with an estimated value north of $250,000, once the paperwork and provenance were verified, which, thanks to Jack's careful work, they already were. Victoria Hale saw the story on her phone during a Monday morning meeting at Hale Motors, and nearly dropped her coffee when she recognized the man in the photo, standing proudly beside a low gray car in his own backyard, his daughter Maya on his shoulders, both of them grinning. She remembered the cream coat, the laughter, her own voice saying, "Somebody's about to learn an expensive lesson in scrap metal." She had been the one who needed the lesson. She thought about the acquisitions team she managed, the scouts trained to walk past anything that didn't look profitable at a glance, herself included, and wondered how many other Lot 214s they had all walked past over the years without a second look. 3 months later, at the spring auction, the once-forgotten prototype sold for $285,000 to a private collector who promised to loan it to a museum. Jack used the money to do 3 things: pay off the last of his late wife's medical debt, open a small independent restoration shop of his own, Sullivan's Garage, and set aside a fund for Maya's college education. Victoria Hale sent a formal offer letter the following week, inviting Jack to consult for Hale Motors on rare vehicle acquisitions. It was a generous offer, more money than Jack had ever been paid for a single project in his life. He turned it down anyway politely, choosing instead to keep his shop small and his hours his own, close enough to walk Maya to school every morning. He hung a sign above the door of his new shop. "Every car has a story. We just take the time to listen." Maya, now 9, liked to sit on an old stool by the workbench after school, swinging her legs, watching her father work. "Dad," she asked him one evening, "were you scared, buying all those broken cars?" Jack smiled and kept turning a wrench. "Every single day," he said. "But I was more scared of never trying. Sometimes the thing everybody else laughs at is the thing worth betting on. You just have to be willing to do the work nobody else wants to do." Maya thought about that for a moment, swinging her legs off the stool. "Like homework," she said solemnly, and Jack laughed so hard he nearly dropped the wrench. Somewhere across town, in a much bigger office with a much bigger view, Victoria Hale kept a printout of that first news article in her top drawer, not as a trophy, but as a reminder. She never mocked a bulk lot again.